curiosity code and has a curiosity index and has spent her whole life being basically, I'm going to rename you Dr. Curiosity. And Diane Hamilton, this has been her life. This is what she studies. It's what she thinks about. And so I'm very excited just to, take a foundational moment as opposed to the COVID moment and introduce our special guest, Diane Hamilton, Dr. Diane Hamilton, and the creator of the Curiosity Code, both the code itself and the book. And I'm just intrigued to listen and learn.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dover. I'm excited to be here. I think it's really fun to hear a lot of different perspectives on sales in general. My background has been decades in sales. I've sold everything from pharmaceuticals to real estate to lending, bank type of loans and that type of thing, to computers and software. So, I mean, it's just all over the board. And then running companies, you're always selling something of some sort. So I found it really interesting that it all kind of helped me later as a professor to teach a lot of the sales courses and marketing courses and developing brand publishing courses that I developed for Forbes and different things as I worked as the MBA program chair at the Forbes School. And so I did all these different aspects of training, but I kept coming back to what was so important, and it was curiosity. Part of my job now is still teaching. Part of my job is running a radio show. Part of it is running these companies. And no matter who I talk to who's really successful, they've all been super curious. So it led to my interest in looking into the importance of curiosity. And that's such a broad term, isn't it? I mean, you say that and you think, well, is it just exploring? Is it just reading? Is it just learning? I look at it often as getting out of status quo behaviors. And you might have seen the thought experiment they did to look at status quo thinking. A woman went into a doctor's office and she thought she was getting her eyes examined, but she was really part of this big thought experiment where all these people around her were actors, but she didn't know it. She thought they were patients. So every minute or so, the bell would ring for no reason, and everybody around her got up and sat down without any explanation at all. And she looked a little confused, but after just 3 times of this bell ringing, she got up and sat down with everybody else. And they call that social learning. She's going along with everyone because it's comfortable, right? Everybody else is doing it. So you get up and you sit down and you don't ask and you don't question things because you don't want to stand out, right? So they thought, well, isn't this interesting that, she'd do this with everybody doing this around her? So they took everybody out of the office one at a time as if they're getting their eyes examined to see how she would respond then. And the bell rings and she gets up and she sits down because she's got this is how it's supposed to be done kind of thought process now. And so they entered, more people into the waiting room who were actual patients to see how this would impact them. And when she stood up and she sat down, the guy next to her looked at her and said, well, why did you do that? And she said, well, everybody else was doing it. I thought I was supposed to. So we all do that at work. We all have certain things we do because we're supposed to, right? We just have been taught that way. Sometimes we're trained into thinking a certain way. I know I was thinking of my pharmaceutical sales experience. I was listening to a lot of these talks of people, what they sell now and what they've sold and the importance of curiosity. And I've heard some of these talks today. And it brought me back to how I was trained out of my competencies in my pharmaceutical training. Now, and when I want to explain about that, because they were really great trainers. They taught me my products inside and out. And if you've ever been a pharmaceutical rep, I mean, just learning pathogens and names of everything, it's so very complicated. I sold Cipro. And so, when you're selling these meds that have pathogens, there's a million words you have to learn. And so there's all, on top of the sales training, you had to have all this great memorization. And so I'm probably very young at the time, maybe in my early 20s. And I'm sitting in a doctor's office and I'm thinking, okay, they've trained me that I'm supposed to talk about this product and this product and this product. And this guy's supposed to be a real jerk, or the gal or whoever the doctor is, and I'm going to have to say this or do that. And they programmed what we called a detail with our sales presentation. So we were going to detail the doctor. And I had it so programmed in me that when I got in there, I was just like, okay, here I go. And I gave my presentation and I couldn't believe it. I got so excited. I got all 3 products in, and it was just like unheard of to do that, right? Because, so I'm walking out of there and I'm patting myself on the back going, yeah, that was good. Okay, I'm a natural at this, right? And so I get in the elevator because I had to go get samples for the doctor to come back with. And I had to go a couple floors down, and a guy got on the elevator with me. And since I'm a total extrovert, I'm in sales, right? So I can't go 2 floors without talking. The guy gets on with me. I look at him. I said, so do you work in the building? And he looks at me just mortified because he was the doctor I had just sold to. And he looks at me and says, you just detailed me. I mean, it was just the worst possible thing that could happen to you, right? You're young, you think you've done this great thing. But how many people don't get on the elevator with you to tell you what you did was horrible, right? That you didn't ask any questions. You didn't do what you really needed to do to find out their pain points, to learn their needs, to empathize with their situation. None of that came into play. And I often wonder if that led to my interest later in studying curiosity, because even though I've sold everything in the world, I wanted to measure certain things. And when I got my doctorate, I actually wrote my doctorate on the relationship between emotional intelligence and sales performance, because I wanted to see what makes people successful in sales. And I remember stumbling on this idea of emotional intelligence years and years ago, thinking, well, that's kind of a cute little topic. And then now it's like everywhere, right? And you hear it all the time, the importance of it. And of course, there was a correlation. And I think one of the biggest parts of emotional intelligence that's really important that we'll talk about is empathy. But before I get into that, I kind of want to give a little background on curiosity in general and how it starts and what happens to it in us. Because to know where it goes, you got to find out what path it's gone on, kind of, right? So think about this. We're all born super curious. We all have these, you see these little kids, why, they're driving their mother or father crazy. And I was one of those kids. But if you look at a chart and you look at how it's the same as with creativity, if you look at it, peaks around age 5 and then it starts to tank as we get older. And there's a lot of research done on this. There's some great TED Talks. I would recommend watching Sir Ken Robinson. If you haven't seen his TED Talk, it's really good. It's one of the most viewed ones. He talks about how we're educating ourselves out of our creativity. But also, George Land does a great TED Talk about how he studied kids at NASA, and he followed them in a longitudinal study to look at how they were these creative geniuses when they were 2, but then by the time they're 31, almost none of them were, and almost all of them were when they were young. And it's the same thing with curiosity. We have what the Max Planck Institute coined as the curiosity gene, which means we have this innate quality of curiosity, but something happens to us as we go through time. And that's what I was interested in researching. But you know that kids ask, it's 100 questions a day at the age of 3, okay? I mean, it's just a massive amount of curiosity. There's a great picture from Time magazine, and I think it was like the 1968 edition, and it has these 2 little girls looking through an air conditioning vent on the ground of the wall. It's one of the ones that are facing on the wall. And then all around them, they're at the Museum of Art. Okay, so what are you supposed to be looking at the San Francisco Museum of Art? You're supposed to be looking at the art on the wall. But no, these 2 little girls are looking behind the vent because they're curious. They want to know what's behind there. And, you look at that, you think, well, I kind of want to know what's behind there. I'm kind of curious. And you wonder, well, what happened to that? Where did it go? I mean, I really think that there's a sense that we have it, but then we lose it. And why do we care as companies that we don't still have it? And I think it's because of there's a lot of costs involved. And I have had just every expert you can imagine. I've interviewed more than 1,000 people on my radio show. And one of them I interviewed was Daniel Goleman, who made emotional intelligence so popular. He's one of the biggest researchers. He's got a great book about why EQ can matter more than IQ. I highly recommend it. But if you look online, you could find that I know that the EI consortium says we're losing something like 16.8 billion a year due to low emotional intelligence levels. But emotional intelligence is really critical for sales, because how you come across to others is important. And when I was in pharmaceutical sales, they used to ask us, they used to rate us, I should say, on our concern for impact. And I think about that now, and that was like in the 80s, you know, I mean, this was a long time ago that they thought about this, and they were ahead of the time because Goldman didn't even write his book till 95, right? So you think, how do you care about how you come across to others is a huge factor. And if you're not asking that question, if you're not curious about how other people see you, and if you don't have that desire to find out about them, like I didn't with that doctor, you don't have that empathy. And empathy is a critical factor for success. I mean, I could remember my boss used to ride days in the field with me, and he was just great at looking around and seeing the trophies or the pictures or the you know, the plaque on the wall or whatever, wherever they went to school. And he knew how to relate to people just so well because he was curious about them. And that comes through when you care about somebody, when you're not just there going, hey, here's my pen, you got to buy this, it's red. And, you know, you're going through, you know, you may know the difference between features and benefits, but are you really looking at what do they need? What problem can I solve? And are you empathizing with what their perspective is? I also research perception, and perception is a combination of EQ for emotional quotient, IQ, for obviously intelligence, but also CQ for cultural quotient, understanding what's influenced them, and CQ for cultural quotient. So I think that that's really critical because it ties into leadership and just collaboration in general, which is another cost that companies are enduring. They're losing 37 billion a year on, you know, depending if you look at homes or different sites, it gets up into the hundreds of billions a year, depending on where you look. But we're dealing with conflict issues. We're dealing with team problems. You know, when I first started in pharma, they had us on our own territory, and then later they'd add you had a partner, and then later you had 4 people, because if 2 people did it so well, 4 people would do better, and then eventually 8 people, and you had all this team conflict going on. You know, and in ways it was great to add more people, but the more diverse the team got, the more creative and better the end product on teams, but then the more conflict you have. So the more you do this, you have to learn collaboration. And if you haven't seen Amy Edmondson's TED Talk, I highly recommend that one, because she talked about how they got the Chilean miners out from underneath that rock disaster. And it was all about teams working together who had never known each other before, because they were humbled to ask questions and be curious enough to collaborate well. And she's a great Harvard professor, and she's been on my show, talked about this with her, as well as talked about curiosity with another Harvard professor named Francesca Gino. Makes a great case. Francesca's got a lot of research out there on the importance of curiosity. I recommend her article on HBR. Look up what she did. She did a case study talking about how leaders think they encourage curiosity, but how individuals don't really feel like they're rewarded so much for it. There's a disconnect. And the more we can be curious, the more successful we can be, and the more engaged we can be, because we know we're losing, if you go by Gallup, 500 billion a year and up, right, on disengaged employees. It's really interesting to think of what makes people engaged. I remember sitting around in a sales meeting one time, and everybody was sitting around, and we shared what we liked the best about our jobs. And I could remember thinking, I was the nerdy one. I'm like, I love the paperwork. I like the stuff no typical salespeople liked, you know. So I obviously, I didn't raise my hand to say that, because everybody go, oh, you know what I mean? But everybody around the table had their different things that they loved. And I remember people saying, oh, I just love driving. And I'm like, driving would be the worst part of my day, right? But to know what people love and what they feel impassioned about is really critical. In you know, you might have a sales team where one person has to do this and another person has to do that. And if somebody's really great at this and somebody's not so great at that, and you can figure out how to pull the best performance out of your team. And I had Doug Conant on my show, and he was the CEO of Campbell's Soup. And anybody ever has taken a course in business, you've probably read the case study about how he turned everything around at that company, because everybody was really bummed out. It was a depressing place to work. Nobody gave much attention to how people felt. And he used his curiosity to ask people about what motivated them, what did they like. And he ended up writing more than 30,000 handwritten notes to everybody by the time he was done. And it motivated people because it showed that he cared. He had that empathy, that emotional intelligence, that sense of curiosity about them. And I don't think he had any intention to write that many notes, but it turned out it worked out for him. But there's a lot of companies that have used curiosity to really be super successful. I work with Novartis and Verizon and really large companies. What I do is I go to companies and we, they take my curiosity index and then we discuss how all the factors that hold people back from being curious, and then we develop how to move forward. But Novartis also does some training of their own. They have a very high level culture of curiosity set into their goals. In fact, I just spoke for last month for them for their Curiosity Month. Every month of actually in September is their Curiosity Month. And they brought in, I think, 180 professionals to come in and share expertise on curiosity and developmental learning. They also do their own research, and I'm doing some test studies with them to look at their employees to see, how their levels change over time if you go through certain training. But Verizon is another great example because before all this COVID craziness, I was in New York and we were making little videos, vignettes for them to play with it to motivate people about the value of curiosity. And just a few minutes, 3 to 5 minute things, nothing really long. And they would put a little bit about me talking about the value of curiosity. And then they would take in people from the company who had really embraced curiosity and become successful from it. And they use these to motivate people, and they play it in their onboarding even to get people in, because you want to hire curious people, but you also want to develop that curiosity in people once you hire them. I think there's a lot of great examples. I've had Xander Lurie on my show, who's the CEO of SurveyMonkey. They're so embracing curiosity that they changed their street name to like One Curiosity Way or something. It's such a part of their culture. But there's a lot of great inventions. I mean, we know that we've lost a lot of companies. We know that if they don't embrace curiosity, they're going to end up like Kodak or Blockbuster, but if you let people explore, we always hear about Google letting people explore. We hear about the big names, right? We hear about products like Velcro or, the guy that created Velcro was just taking his dog for a walk one day and had burrs in the dog's hair. He couldn't get out. Thought, well, why doesn't this thing come out? Looked at it under a microscope, saw it was a hook and eye kind of thing. Maybe I could create something like that. But, top companies have just explored ways to improve just ways of doing things. Monopoly came out with, every year, you see Monopoly, they have like cats editions and dogs editions and all these different editions. And they thought, well, let's come out with something different. So they use their sense of curiosity to explore how do people play Monopoly and what's different about it. And they found that 50% of people cheat who play Monopoly. So I know none of you guys are on that list, but 50% do. And they created the Monopoly's Cheaters Edition, and it was their second biggest launch ever. So sometimes we can create changes to existing products to have this unbelievable way of selling. Sometimes, I actually sold a product that was exactly the same as my competitor's product. We both had a pharmaceutical. It was the same. We co-marketed it, right? And they had the same price, the same distribution, the same chemical. There was nothing different about it. There was only one thing different about it, and it was the name. They had one name for their company, and I had another name for my company. So if I didn't utilize my curiosity to think, how can I differentiate myself? Mine was Zestral, as I recall, and I had Zest soap and drills and things in my car, and anything I could do to get them to remember it. You have to explore. But sometimes things don't work, and you have to know when to let go of things. And you have to say, this was great for a while, and then it doesn't work anymore. And that's what happened to Kodak and Blockbuster is they didn't celebrate the win and realize, okay, that's how we used to do things, but now we have to be curious about new ways to do things. And Ben & Jerry's is great with that because they have great flavors, but once those flavors don't become popular anymore, they actually give them a funeral. And they put it on a website and they say, this flavor lived from this year to this year, and we're going to celebrate this win, but hey, we're going to move on. It doesn't work anymore. It's really critical to question how you're doing things and to maybe look outside of your industry and look outside the way other people are doing things. Van Moof makes a bike. It's like a hybrid bike. And they were shipping them to different locations in a big flat box, and they kept breaking. And they kept thinking, well, how can we fix this? We don't want to spend a lot of money. We don't want to, double the size of the packaging and all that was just going to cost us too much. So they did some exploring. They questioned, they were curious, and they looked at other products that sold in similar size, shipped in similar size boxes. And they found a flat screen TV. Hey, that's similar size box. How are they doing? Well, they weren't breaking. And they're thinking, well, how could this not break and ours breaks? And the only real difference was the flat screen TV had a flat screen picture on the top of the box. So they thought, well, let's just try printing a flat screen on our box, a few pennies extra for ink, see what happens. Dramatically reduce their breakage. So there's things like that you can do. There's things that curiosity can bring about that if you just research a little bit. Disney did some great turnover changes because of asking questions. They, everything at Disney looks like really fun and glamorous, but they actually have a laundry division. And as fun as it is to fold sheets and be in a laundry, it's not great even at Disney. And they were losing a ton of people. So they thought, well, let's just ask people, how can we make your job better? And they thought, well, we could do that, but they'll probably come back with things that we're never going to be able to do anything about, but let's just do it. And they did, and they came back with things like put an air vent over my desk, or have my table go up and down so my back doesn't hurt so much, or just things that they could do something about. And they dramatically improved their turnover. So you have to think of what kinds of questions can you ask and where can you ask them. And I remember in my book I wrote about a hospital in London who they were having great amount of deaths, unfortunate deaths, I should say, in their moving people from the OR after recovery to the ICU. And they kept trying all the tried and true ways that they've always done things, and they just couldn't make things any better. So one night, a couple of the executives were watching on TV, and they saw the Ferrari race car team do a pit stop, take the car apart, put it back together, 7 seconds, and take off, like no problem, right? And they thought, well, if they can do that, why can't we move a patient from here to here? And they decided they actually had the race car team come in and show them, how they did things. And the race car team gave them some feedback, here's the 3 simple things that we would change. And it dramatically improved lives. So I think what, a lot of people don't do is, we're all in our silos. Here's sales, here's marketing, here's this, here's that. We don't talk to these people, or we don't go out that side of this industry, or we stay within this company or this industry, but sometimes we have to think outside. And I think that that's why I got so interested in curiosity and what makes people do that. So I started to determine the factors that keep people from being curious, because as my research found out, as I was writing the book, I go, well, hey, I want to fix this. But if you look out there, all the assessments told you was if you're curious or not, right? Are you high or are you low? Well, if you're low, then what do? You can't, good luck, right? I didn't want that. I wanted to say, hey, this is what's stopping you, and this is how to fix it. And, I put a lot of great research behind this. I looked at Carol Dweck's got a great book on mindset. If you haven't read that, Range is another great book. Daniel Pink and Simon Sinek, all their books. I recommend reading all of them. But as far as curiosity assessments, they had the Big Five is a big common one that they look at, openness to experience. But again, that's how high or low your levels are. So I put a thread in LinkedIn and started to ask people, what holds you back from being curious? And I started to get kind of, responses, and they were kind of fear-based more than anything. But I thought there's got to be more than just fear. So I spent the next few years researching this and doing factor analysis to get a valid idea of what holds people back. And there are 4 things that hold people back from being curious. So I hope you're curious, because I'm going to share them with you. And the acronym is FATE, F-A-T-E. And the first factor is fear. Now, I was not surprised by that. Everybody doesn't want to look stupid. You're in a meeting. You're not going to ask a question sometimes because it's going to make you look dumb or unprepared, or, all the things that people dread feeling. And this is, in my research, it was a little bit higher for women than men, but it was pretty close. No one wants to be embarrassed. We're going to go, hey, Howard, you ask the question. I don't want to ask it because I don't want to look dumb. I'm better that Howard looks dumb than I look dumb. And we do that, right? but that doesn't help us. And once we recognize what holds us back, we can move forward. I had a boss who I had looked at and asked him, you know, how do I do this? This one thing I've never had to do. And he looked at me and he said, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. Well, you get people talking to you like that. And if that had happened when I was young, I'd probably have shut down and never asked another question, right? But I happened to be older than he was and had more experience. And I'm like, well, you're ridiculous for saying that. But young people can be really held back. And you don't even have to be young. You can be just intimidated easily. And so that'll lead to the second factor, which is assumptions. And your assumptions is the voice in your head. So now he could have made this voice in my head thinking, well, I'm not going to ask questions because last time I asked a question, I just got, shut down. And I don't like to read about that because it's not interesting. I've read about that when I was young and, oh, that's too hard. I'm not smart enough. Or you think about the way we talk to ourselves and the things we say, we don't even recognize that there's this voice in our head. And it's like holding a thing of water. If I hold on to this water for a little while, it doesn't, no big deal. I hold on to it for an hour, it becomes heavy. And after a day, my arm becomes paralyzed. The same thing with our thoughts. If we hold on to it for a minute, no big deal, it's a fleeting thought. Hold on it too longer, it can stop us. And after a while, it paralyzes us. So we need to put the water down. And the same with technology. Technology can hold us back in a way that we could over or underutilize it. And sometimes, we would have been the greatest mathematician in the world had somebody not just thrown a calculator at us and we never found out the math behind it, maybe. So we need to find that foundation. But once we have that foundation, what can we do with this technology? And what can we do to make the world better? So we need to know, a lot of people are overwhelmed, they're not trained. There's a lot of factors that go along with that. And in environment, we know that environment is just everybody you've ever been around, your mother, your parents, your father, your siblings, your teachers, your social media, this boss, that last boss who said the stupid thing he said, whatever, there's so many things. And in sales, think of how many people shut you down and tell you no. And you have all these things to overcome that if you work on it, you can become much more curious. And they've studied men versus women, and men tend to ask more questions. They aren't as fearful of raising their hand. And I think that it's something we need to develop. And that's one thing that I find, we work on quite a bit with the companies I work with. And I know it's a lot of content, but I wanted to just make sure that we covered some of the things you guys want to talk about in terms of curiosity. Dr. Dover, did you have any questions or want to lead in with anything?
Well, I think I'd like to ask David, do you want to ask that question? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the time. And I'm curious, what has been the best way that you can teach someone to be curious? Because obviously it's really hard to teach emotional intelligence.
It is. I mean, the soft skills in general are something, when I ran the MBA program, I tried to incorporate into courses and different things. And that is a big challenge. But curiosity, we all have it. We all can ignite it. And I look at it as baking a cake. If you bake a cake, you have oil and flour and eggs, and you're mixing it and you're putting it in the pan and you put it in the oven and you want cake. But if you don't turn on the oven, you don't get cake. If you want to have a productive workforce and have everybody making money, we know the ingredients, and that, is engagement, motivation, drive, all those kinds of things. People are mixing those ingredients, but nobody's turning on the oven of the spark of curiosity. And that's what you're asking. And to get to that, you have to find out what stops people, because we're all curious. But if you find out that I'm not exercising that curiosity, that Max Planck gene that they've discovered, because somebody told me I was, that was a stupid question. My family told me I needed to go in this direction. My teacher never answered this question. You have to get to the root of what stops you. And then you do kind of a personal SWOT analysis to figure out that your weaknesses and your threats, and then make incremental, SMART goals to overcome those things. Because once you can overcome what holds you back, then you can move forward.
Well, we're at time for this session. I know that there's one other question that Rebecca asked, is how do you hire for it? And I know that some people are going to take a break now because we're at the time frame, but if you'd like to answer that question. And maybe if if people would like to ask questions, obviously we're in a break now. We can't literally have them come up to stage now and ask you questions like we would in normal settings. So we'll go ahead and allow people to ask questions. Just to clarify to everybody that we are going to be back on at 2:40 Central Time